From the author of Spinsterella, A Strange and Unusual Romance comes Spellbound, a darker shade of black. Get Spellbound this Halloween in paperback and ebook at online booksellers everywhere. When it comes down to the codependent relationship between the Afro-American Negro and the Democratic Party, the Afro-American Negro often sees the Democratic Party through rose-colored glasses. And in those rose-colored glasses, the Afro-American Negro only sees Lyndon Baines Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And because Lyndon Baines Johnson signed those two acts, this Afro-American Negro believes that the Democratic Party is acting in their best interest, when that has never been the case at all. Since its inception, the Democratic Party has been against the Afro-American Negro. The Democratic Party, when it was first founded, was the party that was all for slavery before the Civil War. And after the Civil War, they were the founders of the terrorist organization, the Ku Klux Klan. And even during the Reconstruction period, this organization spent its time terrorizing black business owners, destroying black businesses, and lynching and terrorizing black people in an effort to undermine the growing black economy at the time. And it also tried to undermine and destroy the black political base by insisting blacks who they terrorize go out and vote for Democratic candidates. But the Afro-American Negro, again, because he sees this Democratic Party through rose-colored glasses, overlooks the past history of the Democratic Party and the present history of the Democratic Party, all because he only believes Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And because he was the one who orchestrated the integration policies that allowed blacks to believe that they were accepted by America, most blacks believe that the Democratic Party is acting in their best interest. However, again, that was never the case at all. When you look at the Democratic Party from a panoramic perspective, and you look at that small act that Lyndon Johnson did in 1964 and 1965, and then see what he did after that, you see that the Democratic Party was going right back to its old dirty roots of hating the Negro yet again. Because after Johnson signed those two laws into effect, what Johnson did was implement a plan that pretty much destroyed the entire black economy. And he did that in two stages. The first stage he did was with integration, because he knew that with integration, the Afro-American Negro, with his cognitive distortion and the rose-colored glasses on, was going to believe that white was better. So, because he felt that he was accepted by these white people, he was going to stop shopping at his own businesses in his own community and start shopping at the same stores of people who would not let him sit at lunch counters, like Woolworths and many other businesses that said they did not want the business of the Afro-American Negro and made efforts to keep the Afro-American Negro from even coming near their establishments. Now, in addition to this integrationist policy that Johnson implemented as part of his Great Society, President Johnson also had a plan to deal with the Afro-American Negro in his U.S. military. And how did he do this? What he did was he escalated the offensive in the Vietnam War in 1968 or so. And he did this primarily because he wanted to get rid of the Afro-American Negro. Because in many of these states, the national policy was that every man who was 18 years old had to do 2 years of military service in the United States, and that was part of the draft. And on many of these draft boards, there were a lot of white racists, especially in the South, on these boards, and they would disproportionately draft all of the black men in the community and send them to go fight in the U.S. military and go fight the Vietnam War, which led to a disproportionate number of casualties in the black community. This was a policy done primarily by Democrats for a two-stage reason. One, to pretty much exterminate the Afro-American Negro in the jungles of Vietnam, and two, to destroy the black family. Now, while these Afro-American Negro males were over here fighting in that Vietnam War disproportionately and getting killed off in the jungles of Vietnam, you had the black woman sitting at home watching the news. And while she was watching the news, they were pretty much putting a piece of media that created a idea in her mind. And this program was called Julia. And this program starred Diane Carroll as a single mother who was living well by herself with the help of white liberals and her good job. And because many black women imbibed this idea of Julia and the single mom, you had women getting an idea of being able to live without this black man who was thousands of miles away across the country fighting in a war that had absolutely nothing to do with him. And while she was listening to this and watching this Julia show, she was also watching these white feminists talk about how they wanted to get equality. And because this Afro-American Negro female also wears rose-colored glasses, and she aspires to be just like this white woman, she was sitting there talking about how this white woman, listening to this white woman talk about how this white man was oppressing her, and then started to believe that this black man was oppressing her. And because she was imbibing these white feminist ideas and believing them to be true, she also started to believe that she could be just like this white woman. And instead of seeing herself as black first and a woman second, she started seeing herself as a woman first and black second. And because she started seeing the world from that way, she started to aspire to be even more like this white woman. She saw the opportunity to start transforming herself into an image that was the equal of this white female. And she saw herself making that inroads to trying to get to that white female with the help of the Democratic Party, which told her that her black man could not take care of her because they pretty much created policies which prevented him from doing that, because on these jobs what would happen is the black man could not get equal opportunity, and if he got any type of low-level job, in many cases he could be fired for any reason if he simply just looked the wrong way at a white man. So his employment was unstable, and the female, being told by the white liberal that he had a way of getting her towards the middle class, told her that, you can get my welfare programs and I will help you try to get towards the middle class. And this is how the Democratic candidates and white liberals said: we'll help you get towards the middle class. However, in order to get on our social programs, which are part of Lyndon Baines Johnson's War on Poverty, you cannot have a father in the home. Now, while we had all these men pretty much fighting in this Vietnam War and getting themselves killed, and many other brothers who were out here and trying to make the best living that they can, the females saw the welfare state as a more stable source of income compared to the black man who was trying to do his best on this job, the black male who was struggling in the military, and the other black men who were just trying to do the best that they could. But they saw that welfare state as a more stable source of income and an opportunity to be just like those white women if they worked their way up. So in order to do that, what they did was they started kicking the father out of the home and then trying to raise the child on their own, following the model that they saw in the television show Julia. And as they did that, all this led to the decline of the black community, the black economy, and the black family. And we started to see a real serious decline in the mid-70s as many of these black men were starting to come home from that Vietnam War. When they came home from the Vietnam War, the white liberal was out here pushing his democratic policies towards helping this black woman, but he had nothing for these black men who had just served their country and were looking for opportunities to help themselves in the same way white males got opportunities to help themselves with the GI Bill back in the 1940s. When these guys came home from Vietnam, especially a lot of the black men, all they got was a big bag of nothing. Worse, they had to deal with a black feminist female who was pretty much calling him no good and trifling and comparing him to the white man that they had learned to deify over the last couple of years and see as a hero. They wondered why this man could not be as successful as this white man, not understanding that these Democrats had pretty much stacked the deck against this Afro-American Negro from the day one of that Voting Rights Act and that Civil Rights Act being passed, by making a plan to pretty much divide the black family and destroy the black economy. Because after all this incidents happened, you had the black economy changing from a patriarchy to a matriarchal welfare state, and this was all done by your Democratic Party. But the Afro-American Negro does not see any of that. No, all he sees is that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed that Civil Rights Act of 1964, that Voting Rights Act of 1965, and because he signed those two acts, the Democratic Party is the hero of the Afro-American Negro. Even though the Democratic Party has done more to destroy the Afro-American Negro community than any other force on the planet. You want to talk about white supremacy? There's white supremacy right there, because the destruction of the black economy pretty much done by the Democratic Party, the destruction of the black family done by the Democratic Party, and the saddest part of it all is that the Afro-American Negro continues to vote Democratic in every election, believing that the Democratic Party acts in their best interest, when the Democratic Party has never acted in the best interests of the Afro-American Negro. All it has done is make efforts to undermine the growth of the Afro-American Negro and pretty much make a codependent relationship with the Afro-American Negro so that the Democrats can get their needs met while doing it at the expense of the Negro. What these Democrats have done is attach an emotional hose to the Afro-American Negro and use this to manipulate him. They make him believe if he votes for another candidate from another party that it won't be in his best interest. Meanwhile, every community that is run by these Democrats has run into complete and utter ruin. I remember living in New York during the 1980s when we had gone through 4 Democratic mayors and the city was practically a wasteland. And if it wasn't for the election of a Republican, Rudy Giuliani, back in the early 90s, New York City would still be the cesspool that it was from the 70s to the 1990s. And a lot of these Negroes will sit there and say that Rudy Giuliani was a terrible mayor. But when you look at the difference between 1970s New York and 1980s New York, where crack cocaine was pretty much destroying neighborhoods that were already ravaged by these burned out buildings and high property taxes and other policies created by Democrats, compared to the Times Square that you see now that every kid can pretty much walk around in without a problem. I remember back in the 80s and the 90s, you couldn't even go down there because so many porno theaters were there. But now it's a family-friendly zone. But the Afro-American Negro will tell you that Democrats are the nicest people in the world. They pretty much are acting in their best interest, even though every city they live in right now is a wasteland, thanks to their policies and thanks to their big need for codependent government programs, which pretty much destroy businesses, destroy economic growth, and pretty much turn every part of a country into a codependent welfare state where people never actualize their potential and take themselves to the next level. And what's even crazier about this whole thing is that even after 8 years of Barack Obama doing absolutely nothing for this Afro-American Negro, you still have many of these Afro-American Negroes sitting here talking about they want to go out and vote for Hillary Clinton. Again, a woman who has said that she's going to continue the policies of Barack Obama. So how is continuing the policies of a man who has done absolutely nothing for you going to help you move ahead? This is the same Barack Obama who pretty much let numerous black men, such as Keith Scott, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and numerous others, pretty much, and Eric Garner, let their cases pretty much blow in the wind, while the people who committed these acts of violence against them pretty much have received no sort of consequence for those actions whatsoever. And this is in spite of many of these Afro-American Negroes going out in the street to march and protest over what they believe is police misconduct and racial violence. Yet this Afro-American Negro will sit here and say, I'm going to vote for the Democratic Party, which says they're going to continue the legacy of Barack Obama, which is implementing the same policies which have done absolutely nothing for the Negro for the last 8 years, and even the last 48 years, and the Negro will sit there and say, I'm going to vote Democratic, which is what Lyndon Johnson said this Negro was going to do. He said he was going to have this Afro-American Negro voting for Democrats for the next 200 years. And we see that he wasn't lying, because the Afro-American Negro, sadly, will vote for the same party that has been oppressing him for the last 48 years and not think twice about it, all because he's still wearing those rose-colored glasses that pretty much distort his picture and have him believing, because Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that the Democratic Party is his friend, his ally, and is acting in his best interest, when in actuality, the Democratic Party has been working against the Negro since its inception back in the 1800s. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.